participate into?
I think it varies. I think it'll be a good resource over time. So welcome everyone to The Writing Well. We have Massimo here from Switzerland. So tell us a little bit about your background as a scientist and a writer.
A scientist and a writer, that's right. I'm a PhD in physics, and I've been working in particle physics research at the start of my research activity at the CERN laboratory. That's the largest European laboratory and practically in the world in terms of facilities for particle physics experiments. And then I spent there my first year right after my degrees, and moved then into United States to work at the Lawrence Berkeley Lab up on the hills of the San Francisco Bay, and I participated also at the experiments at SLAC in Stanford. And I was with the Lawrence Berkeley Lab for 9 years. And then in 2005, what happened is that I've been lured by Apple Computer because of different interests of mine. And I, at the time, I was working as well by moving the entire CERN library, the CERN lib. That is a collection of code written in C++ in order to support experiments. And I work with other people in order to bring the entire library of all the software that is used by scientists on a daily basis to the Apple Computers platform when the computer moved to the Intel processor. So we had a Unix machine with all the access to industry standard compilers working in C++, etc. And that had the lure and the sexiness of the Apple computer at the same time. And also the other aspect that was fundamentally interesting for a scientist is that Apple comes with an entire set of tools in order to do graphics, in order to do programming, etc., very, very easily. And having everything combined with the Unix file system together essentially gave you a platform where the entire spectrum of the research activity, from number crunching, from data analysis, histogramming, and then paper production could be done in one single environment in a much easier way. Using a Windows machine was essentially tailored toward business applications, or a pure Unix machine that was essentially dedicated to number crunching application and development, software creation, etc. But the two worlds combined, we found them in Apple Computer, and this is how they got me into the company. And then for other twists of life turns, like in a plot where you, in the novel, you know, and you think you know that everything is going toward one direction, then oops, where are we? Nothing happens, and the character is in troubled water. I became a director with the World Economic Forum in Geneva for still other kind of activities, and in a sense, it allowed me to create a large spectrum of experience and knowledge and feedback from other people. So broaden up my horizon. In terms of writing, I've been writing since I was a kid. I think my first story, I believe I've written it when I was 6 years old. It all came because my dad and my older brother, they were receiving a student magazine. This is sci-fi, science fiction, one of the most known and famous in science fiction literature. And because I was too young to read or to be trusted with a copy of the magazine, the only thing that I had for me were the covers. And the covers of those magazines, if some people have come across the magazine itself, are phenomenal to trigger and excite the imagination of a child.
Yeah.
And I was writing stories either starting from the image in the cover, or a story that was ending up into justifying the images in the cover. So it was either the starting a point or an ending point. In a sense, it was my trigger to invent a story based on the visuals on the cover. And I did that for many years, but without having ever the ambition of the aspiration to be read by anyone. They were just for me, so they could put them on paper and make them permanent, let's say, so not to lose those stories. Then I started my studies in physics, and physics is not a subject that can be taken lightly. So it more and more absorbed my time. Then I started to work in research at CERN, etc. So somehow my muse and my inspiration dried out, or so I thought, until 2011, when literally a story found me and kicked from within and decided that I had to write it. And on a weekend, on that weekend, particular weekend, I put down something like 40 pages of what became the first novel. I spent a year or so to fine-tune again my prose and my writing, and I've been involved with a group of authors, both at their debuts or and even well-established authors online. So this is a peer review group. And for a year or so, I've been receiving harsh criticisms. This is crap, and this is unreadable, you must be crazy, admit this, etc. But little by little, because I believe I have a thick skin, and in my youth I've been playing for 18 years football as quarterback in Europe, not in the US, but still quite a good level, even at the European Championship. So I know how to take hits and recover from them. So I learned for quite a long period of time, until from that critic group the first accolades came, and the first, oh, this is not bad, this is good, oh, you should expand it, this is nice, until someone said, you know what, you should really try to find an agent and publish this story if you keep developing. And so this is essentially how it started. So I spent over a year into fine-tuning and getting the story into its shape, and then I started to look for channels to make it available to readers worldwide. And then since then I published a book every year. Now my publisher is in Seattle, and it's Book Trope, and I just submitted my 4th novel, so it's in the end of the editorial teams over there, and probably will be out by springtime.
Awesome. So, as a physicist, how am I trying to phrase this? When you read something that's science fiction,
right?
How picky are you about things being plausible? I mean, some science fiction isn't physically possible, but it needs to happen and for the story. So how does that line work for you?
It is a fight, both with books and with movies. Unfortunately, when you have a strong and deep training in science, you pick up things that are invisible to other people, not because they don't reason, but simply because they lack the training and the details of information that comes from a very, very specific scientific education. And invariably it ruins my experience, because I say, oh, come on guys, how can you write this, or how can you show this? This is totally impossible. This violates all the laws of physics. This is not going to happen this way. If you had done it another way, maybe. And yeah, it's a problem that is not really like being picky, but it's like being at the museum in front of the Gioconda and seeing on the label that instead of Leonardo da Vinci has been painted by Giotto. And then, of course, you say, who is the crazy museum curator that can mistake this tableau and put a wrong thing? So you really start to have difficulty into appreciating movies unless you switch off your brain and you say, okay, forget it. I'm not criticizing. I'm not judging. Just use a pile of suspension of disbelief, truckloads of that, and then you can enjoy the story. But otherwise, if I look at, I found problems even with Interstellars, for example. I wrote.
Oh yeah, I had issues with that too.
Yeah. Which I know visually stunning. There's nice story, etc. But yeah. Unfortunately, this is something that I also notice, and there is lots of fantasy stories coming out these days. There are more stories that have a scientific pseudo background, but that there is a lot of fantasy injections into the story, which is fine, for as long as you don't call them science fiction. I believe the science fiction really needs to stick to the original meaning, that it is a story where there is a serious, precise scientific element that is needed, otherwise the story could not happen. And of course, the scientific element is totally out of the fantasy or magic world. Okay, this is a fantasy story or a magic story or a fairy tale, but it's not science fiction.
So what would you recommend to an author who does not have extensive scientific background, but who wants to write something that is science fiction?
Right. First of all, I'd say lots of passion and lots of reading as well. If an author who wants to write science fiction, of course, with every genre, and this is not necessarily science fiction per se, it's like telling a person who's like to write historical novels to know nothing about history and then start to invent situation pretending they happened in the past, or situating the characters into places that never existed, never had their organizations or their society or the story, and pretending that it is an historical novel, like putting I don't know, the War of the Roses in England, and you put it instead in Poland during the Roman Empire. I mean, it would be as disturbing as such a thing. So first of all is that today for writers, it is very easy to do research. I mean, it's not like 10 or 20 years ago where you needed to go to a library or getting books everywhere. It's really digging into piles of pages and books and manuscripts and magazines in order to find information. I mean, there is a fantastic tool that is the internet and Google. You can practically do what a writer would have spent 2 or 3 weeks of research only 20 years ago. And then the majority of the largest universities and laboratories in the world, they started years ago to have fantastic resources, and common people can ask questions to scientists. There is an Ask a Scientist at CERN. There is an Ask a Scientist at SLAC and Stanford University. There's an Ask a Scientist at NASA. So if you have, and usually you get your answer within 24, 48 hours, because scientists are passionate about their thing. So imagine there is someone who asks you a cosmological question, fundamental question, what is the dark matter, or whether a black hole, a Kerr black hole, could really be open and sustained open so that the spaceship could go through, and how this will combine with the Einstein-Rosen singularity and make interstellar travel really possible. You would find enthusiastic cosmology scientists and physicists starting talking to you and giving you some of the details in order to not writing a BS on your novel.
Right.
And science fiction, the term fiction is because the story comes from the imagination of the writer. It's not because the science element is fictional. So when people write or read science fiction, they should not believe that the science is fictional. The story is fiction, and there is a scientific element in it.
Yeah. Yeah. So,
So it means that you have lots of research, much more than probably in other kind of in other genre. If you are writing magic or fantasy, really everything can come from your extraordinary imagination. If you're writing romance, you have your daily life that brings you experience. If you want to write a serious science fiction and call it science fiction, then you are confronted with a deal of research.
Yeah. So what would you recommend if you've done all your research and you've written your draft and it's in the editorial process and you discover that new science has been done that changes everything you based your science in your book on? Would you go back and rewrite it, or would you publish it how it was with like a note in the back saying, this new information came out during the publication process, but I didn't want to mess up the story by changing it?
First of all, don't quote me wrong or get the wrong message. Science fiction I'm not hinting at the fact that you should only use science as we know today.
Mm-hmm.
Science fiction means that you may and you should actually extrapolate scientific knowledge of today, looking at edge theories or esoteric theories as well, be aware of those, and pretend that one of them became reality. Then you may create a science fiction that has the roots on well-established science facts, but it is proposing an extrapolation of that scientific knowledge. This is perfectly valid. So, and it doesn't really mean they should only write science fiction using the science of today. After all, you're writing probably futuristic world, alien civilizations, amazing technology. But the important thing is that what you write should not violate principles that we have seen as scientists confirmed over and over and over and over and over again.
Right.
There are things that we know at the fringe, at the edge of our knowledge and the theories that can blossom up into new science. But the core, there is a core that really stands at the principle. On top of this, the entire universe is built. So if you negate those, you are negating the universe itself. And then your story has no place.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. Yeah. So what about works that focus on one discipline of science and do their research very well into that one discipline, but make stuff up about other disciplines? How can people make sure that they avoid doing that?
Well, again, it's the fact that you need to do the research, and I believe that online there are quite good resources that can be found. If you just by example, you go to Google and you type "ask a scientist," you will see hundreds of sites from universities, laboratories in the world where there is really this opportunity for anyone to ask a question to a neuroscientist, to a biologist, to I don't know, a pathologist, to a medicine guru, to a astronomer, anyone, any branch of science, there is a site out there where there are scientists that are willing to talk to you and avoid you to make any blunder. And blunders in any kind of genre ruin the pleasure because they break the suspension of disbelief.
Right.
And if you do that, then the reader realizes that he's reading a book and he's not into this vision that the writer has created and conjured, and you're ruining the experience, the reading of that reader. So, and I believe that in science fiction, we writers have a duty to make so that what we build, for how phenomenal and fantastic extrapolation they can be, the reader should never feel betrayed, especially readers, and in science fiction there are lots of them who have a background in science, who have been reading science, science magazines, popular mechanics, etc., because they like science in general. This is often how you get into the genre of reading science fiction. So you're not talking to people who have no idea what a comet is, who doesn't know what is the law of physics or how a spaceship will behave in space, and etc. You can't write a science fiction story by saying that someone in open space has been calling you,
right?
Not using some electromagnetic waves to send a signal. It's like saying, okay, you can hear me in space. No, you can't. And if you write such a thing, it doesn't matter if you think it is cool, it's bullshit. Sorry for my French. you can't do that. And of course there are mistakes that might be difficult to spot, but serious writers would correct their blunder. And an example that I like to make is the Ringworld from Larry Niven. After the first publications, there has been some. He has received some feedback from engineers who told him and showed him that what he has been written couldn't have the chance to be as he described. So he went back and changed the description of the Ringworld based on those suggestions. Shows that how serious you should be when you write science fiction about the scientific elements that you put into your stories.
Yeah. So
could you excuse me one second, because I'm alone in my place, and I have to answer the door.
Yeah, of course.
You can launch a commercial.
I will go talk about. So I'm a biomedical engineer, and I have tangential physics knowledge from the side of mechanical engineering. And I think it's helpful to be able to talk to both scientists and engineers if you can, because the engineers are the people who are working to advance the technology that we have, whereas the scientists are trying to understand the physical principles, right?
Hello, I'm back.
You're back. I was just talking about how it's useful, I think, to talk to both scientists and engineers, because the scientists often are more looking into why things are how they are, and the engineers are often using that information to make new technology for the future.
Right.
So would you recommend that authors, once they've written their first draft or even gotten to a polished draft, would you recommend that they go find some scientists and engineers who enjoy science fiction and ask them to beta read to help make sure that they get those facts correct before they publish?
Well, this might help, but never get into the error of turning your story into a technical manual.
Of course.
So some kind of explanation and some kind of research is only there so that the sentences and the phrases or the paragraphs that you created are built on top of that knowledge and that research. But that knowledge, that research doesn't need to be in the story or be part of the story. So that it gives the thickness and it gives the plausibility of your statements, because you know that you are basing that vision, that scene, that particular technology, that particular scientific element on something that has roots in real science or a possible extrapolation of real science. But and this is, I believe, is probably one of the mistakes of people who believe naively that writing science fiction is essentially turning everything into a technobabble element, but then practically writing the same cowboys and Indians story. You turn the Indians into aliens, you turn the horses into space machines, you turn the vast prairies into the deep space, and essentially, but you are writing a Western story that is thinly disguised into a science fiction. The Theodore Sturgeon definition for science fiction was quite interesting, because what he said was that what makes science fiction a science fiction story is not because you are using a pseudoscientific background or other planets or future technology as the backstage. What makes science fiction is a story, a real science fiction stories, is when the story could not stand on its leg if some scientific elements, a new technology, or something that has an impact in the society for that book makes the reasons and the structure over which that story takes place. So it's not really just the background. It's not the fact that you are talking about aliens or spaceships.
Right.
This is not real science fiction. I think it, to me, and well, to me and to many others, huge columns and pillars in science fiction. At the time when science fiction stories started to be a little bit adulterated, because in the 70s and in the 80s, especially in the United States, the genre really started to blossom. There was essentially this misconception that the science fiction story was such just because you were talking about alien spaceships and amazing technology.
Right.
Robert Heinlein, for example, never wrote a story that involves aliens. It's all about humans. So it's really this peculiar distinction that the scientific element is what makes the story happen, rather than being just a background or a backstage scenario.
Right.
So in some sense, for example, Star Wars, although I loved it, I love those movies, and it's not science fiction.
Yeah. It feels more like a fantasy adventure than a real science fiction.
It's more a science fantasy story. It's a fable into a futuristic environment per se. But there are many things that, again, you see them and say, "Oh boy,
Yeah.
no, this is not possible."
Yeah.
But extremely enjoyable, and of course the popularity shows it. So I'm not talking down on that kind of story. But if we want to speak about science fiction ab initio, science fiction that has been written by Ursula Le Guin, by Isaac Asimov, or Ray Bradbury, they all have in common this element. First, that they are very, very, very solid from any of the scientific elements that they are using, and the elements that have a roots in science that they're using, for how extrapolated they are crucial to the story. You take out that element, the story crumbles. This is what makes a science fiction story.
Yeah. Have you read Lois McMaster Bujold's books?
I'm afraid not.
No? Okay. They're really good. I was just curious how you would
I'll take
classify
note.
them.
I'll take.
Because I've read them before I did my in-depth scientific studies. So like I was in middle school when I first read them. So I don't know. I'd have to go back and reread them all from the beginning to figure it out. But yeah, her work is one of my favorite series because it's got a good blend of the human side of the stories, but it's also, you know, the main character, his world it was isolated for a long time, so it essentially reverted back to a medieval social structure and then got rediscovered by other spacefaring humans, and then there was like all sorts of technological advancement that happened really quickly. So it was a really interesting look at how technology impacts society and vice versa.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Well, I'll have to take a.
Yeah, it's I think the first one that I have, I think, is there's either Cordelia's Honor or there's Young Miles. Those are the first two, I think. So yeah.
Well, the scenarios and the horizon of science fiction is extremely wide.
Yeah.
People also like to divide science fiction into hard science fiction and soft science fiction, and believe that there are two silos where you put a book either here or there. But in reality, as a mirror, there is a continuum of
right.
a spectrum of science fiction stories, from the hard part to the soft part. And one is not less science fiction than the other.
Yeah. Yeah. So how would you go about making faster than light space travel be scientifically possible?
Well, you know that there are actually studies that are looking into ways to do that.
Yeah.
In the sense that the time it will take to go from point A to point B is shorter than the time that it takes light to go from A to B.
Right.
But done in a way that you are not really going faster than light.
Okay.
So this is for example part of the theory developed by Einstein and Rosen, the famous wormholes. That it is like bending the space structure so that two distant points in space are conjunct if you bend the space-time continuum.
Right.
So what you get is something like this. Instead of going from here to there, you have a way to do this.
Right. And that's how they explain how they get from place to place in A Wrinkle in Time, which is actually, I would consider, more a fantasy than a science fiction. But
right.
It does have that, it uses that principle.
Another theory is the way of compressing the phase space so that the spaceship finds the space-time continuum in front of it that is shrunk right in front of the spaceship. So when it travels, it is as if he has been traveling faster than light, if the space continuum was left unchanged. But in reality, as being able to squash it in front of the spaceship, so that again it traverses through it, reach destinations in a time shorter than what the light beam would have taken to go from point A to point B. So
right.
And again, this is within the possibility of science extrapolated. If phenomenal, complicated technology problems would be solved, and that in principle an extremely advanced civilization might have found the key in order to release that technology exploits, in order to realize these things.
Right.
But in terms of faster than light, by simply thinking that you build huge engines and you keep accelerating. This not. You will never get in
Right.
reference space of your spaceship be able to accelerate faster than a beam of light. You will be able to approach the speed light, but without these, let's say, science magic.
Right.
Although it's not
Right.
magic, but it's the magic that is created by real science. Then the faster than light travel would not be a reality. We need really to change the way and be able to change the way the very essence of the space-time continuum works.
Mm-hmm. So how would something like quantum physics and quantum dot tunneling relate to this compression?
Well, there are, for example, there are studies that have been done in the United States concerning, for example, the creation of wormholes, and it has been demonstrated with a theoretical model using supercomputers that some fluctuation into the quantum fields can create that particular kind of conditions to sustain and keep a wormhole open and connecting two separate points of space, no matter the distance between the two of them.
Mm-hmm.
So what we know in terms of scientific theory does not prohibit technology to reach the point of being able to do that. And another thing that also might sound more magical than science is, for example, the studies that are being done for quantum entanglement.
Mm-hmm.
Quantum entanglement, for example, tells that two different quantum states represented, for example, by two different particles can be coupled such that what happens to the state of one particle is reflected by a change in the state of the other.
Mm-hmm.
And the theory, but also the first experiments show that this relationship with this entanglement does not depend in any way on the distance between the two systems. So
Mm-hmm.
if you do a quantum entanglement here and then you take one of these systems, you put it on a spaceship and you let the spaceship travel for 5,000 year lights, those two particles will still be sensing each other. This
Mm-hmm.
is helpful of the distance that separates them. And this, for example, would be the answer to one of the things that in many stories are left under the carpet, that if a civilization really evolves so much that it can expand and travels through star systems, how do you communicate? You cannot use
Mm-hmm.
radio waves. It
Right.
would be already difficult for us to communicate using radio waves to a mission that has to go to Jupiter, and which the distance is negligible with comparing that to go to another star system. So if
Right.
you want to do this, we need to find a technology that essentially would look at radio wave, electromagnetic communication, like as prehistoric as exchanging smoke signal to
Right.
do a CNN broadcasting news. But science tells us that this, in principle, would be possible, which means that in a phenomenal new world and with the science possibilities all exploited, I could be one day able to communicate to a spaceship that is 10 light years away from Earth, practically without any delay. And this is what makes possible, for example, a real galactic civilizations,
Right.
or who would give plausibility to all those stories where you have your character that is traveling a spaceship, etc., and there is a society that exchanges information and communication. If you write this and you say that, oh yeah, send the radio signal back home, I mean, this would be, for example, a blunder. Say, hey, dude, it's going to take 300 years to reach home.
Yeah.
You cannot have an answer. And of course, this would make me stop reading the story.
Right. Yeah.
So you see, science fiction is not an easy genre to write.
No, but it's so much fun if you like science.
Oh, yeah, no, definitely, because again, it allows to do that extrapolation and using what ifs kind of questions that are at the base of advancing scientific research today as well,
Right.
become a reality. Suddenly they are a reality to your story. But the what if has to be scientific plausible as well.
Right.
So what if the neutrons did not exist is not science fiction. What if quantum physics is wrong is not science fiction. What if proton-proton collision cannot happen and something other magical happens? This is not science fiction.
Yeah.
What if a proton and an antiproton collides, and instead of annihilate and release energy, they combine into a new esoteric atomic structure? Sorry, this is not science fiction.
Right.
This is betraying your readership.
Right. Yeah. I'm processing, thinking.
You're processing.
Well, because your perspective is so different from mine. I mean, my physics is limited to what I had to learn for mechanical engineering in undergrad. So I know sort of little bits and pieces of things, but most of my further studies are in the biomedical,
right.
Medical device design and bioengineering and stuff like that. So it's looking at things from a different side. And it's interesting to think about too. I'm reading Medicine Mind, Medicine Buddha by Charlene Jones.
Mm-hmm.
And I really like how she's written that book because she's talking about principles that people have known through meditation practice for ages. And then she's looking at, okay, this is the science that explains this thing that we've been experiencing for so long.
Fascinating.
And so I like thinking about that and thinking about how all of the different things that we know about science today could explain things in the future that we can't explain now.
Right.
Right? So it's a lot of fun to imagine those what if scenarios and see how things would be different, how things would be the same.
But the what if scenarios are phenomenal in the sense that what new theories in science and possible extrapolation can give us in terms of technology in the future are way beyond anything that anyone can imagine without having this kind of background or without doing this kind of research.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I happen to discuss with people who say, oh, but yeah, science fiction, you just use your imagination, etc. You do it. I say, you have no idea how amazing could be science of today just by reading at the leading edge experiments, at the leading edge theories, and what scientists are trying to break through our current knowledge are so much mesmerizing, more fascinating, more capable of opening a new universe of possibility that any wild imagination world can come from someone who's not spending the right time into look into it. One of the suggestions that I gave sometime in discussion group for science fiction writers or people who like to write science fiction, get interested into science of today and get to know what the leading labs are looking at. you would be shocked how science fiction can sound that science. It's already there. Science fiction is already at our.
Yeah, well, if you think about it, like the stuff that a lot of the technology that they were using in Star Trek is, we have it. Siri and cell
Absolutely.
phones and video conferencing and, it's
Yeah.
all, we have it. Yeah.
So, and this is also quite good for a science fiction writer, because if he or she base the vision on current science and leading theories, leading edge theories, uh, it might well happen that the extrapolation, if they are based on a solid basis, might become science of today, of tomorrow. So
Right.
science fiction, when properly written, can actually predate science.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Well,
you
and
have
it's
to be,
it's it's
you have to
fun
be
too. Like I grew up on Star Trek. It was the only TV show I was allowed to watch. And now I'm an engineer, and I got a lot of my inspiration for becoming an engineer because of the engineers in the world of Star Trek and the things that they could solve,
right.
the problems they could solve, and the things that they could do with what they knew were
Mhm.
really inspiring and to me and to a number of my friends I know as well. So it's kind of fun to know as a writer of science fiction that if you do your research well and if you write your stories well, that you have the impact to inspire future generations of scientists to continue doing all of this
Absolutely.
research.
Absolutely, exactly because of that pushed what if that you are doing, and if
Right.
you do it properly, you really create a plausible new world. That if that particular theory is that particularly crazy idea that some scientist is trying to prove becomes a reality, then that science fiction world becomes the new science,
Right.
and it is a phenomenal uh, experience to see that science fiction of the past, especially when written with this spirit and written by people who knew their science as well, has become the science of today.
Yeah.
So imagine if some of the good science fiction of today will become the science of tomorrow. We will live in a world that is mind-boggling, mind-boggling.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, this has been so much fun and I have so many things to think about. Thank you so much for coming and talking. Um, I I'm actually working on a science fiction story right now. So I was going to, in office hours on Wednesday, I'm going to do some of my starting research for some of my what ifs live on the writing well. So if you are still lost about how to get started, you can
Well,
watch me
don't
do
forget,
that.
don't forget to Google for Ask a Scientist, and then you will get
Yeah, I'll link to those.
lots of places where to get information. Or
Yeah.
you can ask me. Well, well,
Yeah. Well, and
okay.
I was looking up something actually for a fantasy novel the other day. I have a dragon, and dragon blood makes magic more potent, but I needed my dragon not to like die from blood loss.
Right.
So I went and looked up, okay, different animals are like have this much blood per kilogram, and how many kilograms is this dragon, and how much blood is that going to be? So it was kind of fun to be able to do science research.
Or for example, imagine the Lord of the Rings movies when you see those dragons flying. Unfortunately, those wings could not sustain that body up in the air. But
Yeah,
it's fantasy. It's Lord of the Rings. It's great.
right,
In
right.
that case, who cares? Let the dragon fly.
Yeah, yeah. No, I don't actually know. I haven't thought about the aerodynamics of my dragon yet. I tend to do my research as I realize I need to know something instead of learning everything all at the beginning. I realize I don't know something that I need to know in order to explain something, and then I go look it up or calculate it. So So I don't know the aerodynamics of my dragon yet, but I do know I do know how much blood can be drawn from my dragon without harmful effect. Random fact. Yeah, but I'm gonna be looking into. Oh, I made a list. Where did I put my list? My list of things I need to find out. That's not the right one. This is the problem with having lots of projects. You end up with a million lists.
Oh yeah, I know, definitely. Thank the Lord we have computers.
I know. Yeah, so I have to look into fusion for power, and I have to look into. I guess it's probably going to be more similar to a wormhole, but it's not going to be spaceship related. I don't know. We'll see. We'll see what I come up with. I need a way for people to be able to be transferred from Earth to Mars and back again without having to go through space. So I need it to be a similar concept or a similar effect to the transporters in Star Trek, but I don't want it to be a transporter. I don't know. In my head, it's more like a door you walk through somehow, except it's not really a door.
You need lots of computing power in order to.
Yeah. Well, and I need to know how this technology works, but the people in the story don't know how it works because they found it when they were doing an excursion to Mars. Like there was a scientific expedition to Mars and they found it. So they don't know how it works. They just know that it does. But I need to know how it works for a different story later that deals with how it got left there.
For as long as you will be able to show it without negating physics principles, then you should be fine.
Yeah.
Without explaining.
Yeah. Well, I want to know how it works. I like knowing that kind of stuff. But yeah, so there's that, and there's all sorts of things. They're like drones, but they look like bugs. They're like mosquito sized, and they give you mind control drugs.
Oh wow! Well, the drones the size of insects, they are already there.
Yeah. The drones are there. I don't know if they're dispensing medication against people's wills. I hope they're not, but you never know. Someone could be doing nefarious things.
Oh yeah. One of the nice things about writing fiction is also that we can think of all the conspiracy theory and make it a reality.
Right. Yeah. And then we can go and be like, hey, you just read my book and now you're worried that this might happen. So let's go make some policies so that it doesn't. Yeah. So that'll be fun. I'm gonna do that on Wednesday. All of this, at least the beginnings of it. I don't know. We'll see how far I get on the show live, but that'll be fun. And thank you so much again for all of your insight and advice. And yeah.
And feel free to find me on the social networks.
Yeah.
And my blog as well. I have quite a few articles in terms of the science that have been used in science fiction. And when it is done properly, the line between science and science fiction is rather spread and blurred.
Yeah.
And this is what makes the beauty of it.
Yeah.
So thanks for having me in your channel, and I hope that whoever has watched it got some good information and inspiration.
Yeah, thank you so much.